Once Upon a Time in Hollywood is now in theaters, ladies and gentlemen. It is out. I went to go see it yesterday. I've been excited for this film for a couple of reasons. Number one, it's Quentin Tarantino, for heaven's sakes. So that's a reason to be excited. Number two, you got Brad Pitt and Leonardo DiCaprio, you got Al Pacino, you got Kurt Russell, you got Luke Perry, you've got on and on and on and on. You just kind of got this who's who in this movie. It looks great. I love these period setting movies, so it's set in there. I thought the trailers looked really good and really interesting. All that kind of stuff. Went out to go see Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. What did I think about it? All right. Here's my overall thoughts, and then we'll get into some specifics. And by the way, guys, I'm just going to let you know that this Sunday afternoon, because there's so much stuff to talk about here, this Sunday afternoon, we're going to do a open spoiler discussion of Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, because there's a lot of stuff in there to talk about that I can't mention on the show without giving significant things away. So later Sunday afternoon, we are going to do a spoiler discussion for that. Keep your eyes open for that if you see Once Upon a Time in Hollywood this week. All right. So what did I think about Once Upon a Time in Hollywood? Well, I'll say this. It is not amongst my favorite Quentin Tarantino movies. Let's just put it that way. It's not amongst my favorite Quentin Tarantino movies. I didn't walk out of the theater overly in love with it. But, lest you think that's a negative, I thought it was, as I put on my social media afterwards, I think it's a very solid movie, and it's an enjoyable movie. It is an enjoyable movie. And despite the fact that the movie is about 45 minutes longer than it needs to be, despite the fact there are one or two prominent characters in the film that if you cut their character out of the film completely, the movie doesn't change at all. And despite the fact that it doesn't really have a discernible plot, which I'm sure you've heard a lot of other people say, and it doesn't. It doesn't have what you would call traditionally a plot for the movie. Despite all that, this is a movie that is packed with really magical moments. Like, there are so many moments in this film that I will be talking about with my friends for a while. You know, every movie will have a couple of moments like, oh, remember that one scene? There are like a dozen or more of those types of scenes in Once Upon a Time in Hollywood that are just incredible scenes. I could sit here and talk about, you know, maybe I'll reference just briefly the things that you've seen in the trailer, so I'm not giving too much away, but like, there's a scene in the movie where he's talking with a young girl actress. Boom! That's a scene I want to sit down and talk about for a while. There are several scenes just between DiCaprio and Brad Pitt that I think you can just go on and on about. There's several scenes involving like things from the trailer, like when you see the people walking up at night with the knives in their hands. That whole scene I want to talk about. There's so many. Yeah, it was way too long than this film needed to be. See, 2 hours and 45 minutes is a great length for certain movies. For this movie, it was much longer than it needed to be. But it's just filled with moments. And I'll say this, and I said this on social media as well. You cannot replace Endgame as the best final 20 minutes of a movie you're going to see this year. But I'll tell you what, after Endgame, it's Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. Other than Endgame, I would argue, you're not going to see a better final 20 minutes in a movie this year. I feel pretty damn confident about that. I still have other movies I need to see this year, but I feel pretty confident at this point stating I don't think we're going to see a better final 20 minutes this year besides Endgame and Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. Okay, let's talk about this though. The performances in the film. As kind of ridiculous as the movie tries to be, the performances in it are outstanding. I loved Leo DiCaprio in this. And he's one of the absolute best actors on the planet. I know that sounds like you're saying water wet. I get it. But Leo DiCaprio is phenomenal in this. Just phenomenal in this. Brad Pitt, I haven't seen him this good in a long time. I just have not seen Brad Pitt this good in a long time. The dialogue is sharp and witty. I mean, the fact that they transformed, when you watch this movie, keep this in mind. All the exterior shots of the city and when they're driving and all that kind of stuff, none of that is CG. They really did transform Hollywood back to its 1969 state. And it's remarkable the way they did. It was absolutely beautiful. And it was... As an achievement, as a practical achievement, just doing that was really impressive. And by the way, that whole thing is one of the reasons why this film was so bloody expensive to make. not from CGI. This is one of those situations where CGI would have been cheaper, but they actually just physically transformed a lot of Hollywood, Hollywood Boulevard, Sunset Boulevard, all over the round. They just did a lot of that stuff, and it's really impressive to see. I gotta say this, so I gotta get this part off my chest. One of the things that was most frustrating to me through this movie, and this ties in to the fact that I said one of the down parts about Once Upon a Time in Hollywood is that for this movie, it was longer than it needed to be. And nowhere does that stand out more than the elongated, masturbatory driving shots. You know, every once in a while in a movie or TV show, the character has to get in their car and drive from one place to another. And you'll see a cutaway, almost like a B-roll shot, a cutaway shot of, you know, a wider angle. You see the car coming towards the camera and it drives by. Okay, that kind of tells that our character is driving somewhere. And this sounds like a nitpick, but I'm only bringing it up because it's the one thing that really frustrated me through the movie. I swear to God, I didn't take a stopwatch into the movie theater with me, and maybe it just feels this way. But if I take a stopwatch with me next time, I'm not going to be surprised. And again, maybe it just feels this way. But I'm not going to be surprised if at least 10 minutes of this film aren't taken up with those just random driving shots. Not where there's conversation going on in the car, just Brad Pitt driving in his car, and we see him driving. And then there's a wide shot so we can see Hollywood Boulevard. And then we're back in the car just with him. Nothing else is happening, just driving. And then from another wide shot from another angle of his driving. And it just felt like and then they would do it again. And then they would do it again. And I swear to God, it feels like 10 full minutes of this movie. And maybe it's much smaller than that. I'm just telling you, it felt like a good 10, 15 minutes of this movie were just taken up with gratuitous, well, I spent all this money making Hollywood look like Hollywood in 1969, so I might as well show as much of it on screen as I can. And that didn't help the movie. That didn't help the movie. Now, again, I know you might be saying to yourself, John, why are you complaining about that? Just because it's the weirdest thing, but it just, every time it's kept happening again and again, it was just starting to grate on me. And I'd say now look, if the most frustrating thing about a movie that you can say is, they spent too much time on exterior driving shots. If that's the worst thing you can say about a movie, you're in pretty good shape, so that's not bad. But again, that contributed to the overall stuff. But again, this is a movie of moments. And that's where the strength of it lies. It lies in these individual scenes, and maybe they don't do a great job of the movie in connecting them narratively per se to create an overall narrative story or a plot or anything like that. Fine. But it is a movie of moments. And with a terrific finale and payoff at the end that even though it's not amongst my favorite Quentin Tarantino films, and that's a high bar, even though it's not amongst my favorite Quentin Tarantino films, I think there's a lot to enjoy about this movie. I really do. It's a very different kind of film. I think there's a lot to do with it. And I saw somebody write to me, say, John, you just didn't understand it. Don't you love it when people say that? You just didn't understand it. This movie, it's not that it lacked a plot, it's that the movie was meant as a love letter to the Hollywood that was in 1969. It's like, I know that. But that doesn't cancel out the fact that it was still too long and that it had no plot. It's not an either or, it's a both and. It was a love letter in 1969. Or Hollywood 1969, and it was too long for its own good, didn't really have a coherent plot or a discernible plot per se. It's both and. But it absolutely was a love letter to the Hollywood of 1969, not just exterior, but also the industry of Hollywood at that time. And it's interesting and it's fascinating, and I enjoyed it. I enjoyed Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. Was it as good as maybe I was kind of hoping it would be? Nah, but when you go into a Quentin Tarantino movie, your expectations are all the way up through the roof, right? But I still think it's a solid movie. I still think it's quite enjoyable, and I had a good time with it. I'm reading some people online saying they found it kind of boring, and I understand where that's coming from because, like I said, it is dragged on longer than it needed to be. But I still think, for my money, it's still quite an enjoyable film, filled with terrific scenes, not just one or two or three, but filled with some terrific scenes. And yeah, so that's my thoughts on Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. Again, I wish we could talk about more stuff in more detail, but I don't want to spoil anything. So this Sunday afternoon, we will be doing an open spoiler discussion on the channel. If you see the movie by Sunday afternoon, come on back and make sure you talk to us about it. All right.